be aware, if you are repeating or just sort of going on the same tack as previous questions, I will disallow the question because we want to get as broad a set of questions as we possibly can. So, over to my travelling microphone.
Shall I kick off with the first of the received questions?
Yes, that'd be lovely.
Okay.
What do you do? What's C-set? Could you remind me? And what's C2C?
C2C is the busway coming in from the west. Coming across. Camberwell to Cambridge. Yes. And C-set is the one coming from the A11 into Cambridge across the Carpen Hills. Okay?
Okay. Bearing in mind that we have two international centres of excellence about a mile from where we are tonight, how would the candidates address the chronic underfunding of health, and in particular social care, and the significant impact Brexit has had on staffing in both sectors?
Thank you very much. Well, I already touched on sort of the state of our NHS and also the fact that in terms of adult social care, why we need to fix that is because we have many, many elderly people who are in beds, in hospitals, well enough to go home, but they can't be discharged because at home there isn't the care available for them for their needs, or even in care homes. And why? Because we've got a crisis in adult social care. We've got over 113,000 vacancies in adult social care. And that's what the Liberal Democrats want to fix. So first of all, our two centres of excellence. We've got pretty good funding coming into secondary care, into our hospitals. But I've talked to our GPs and to our integrated care wards here. Cambridgeshire receives the lowest amount of funding per person for primary health care of the whole country, out of 42 healthcare systems. And that's because of a funding formula that was set wrong in 2009, has never been put right, and has never been adjusted for the unprecedented growth we have. So we have GP surgeries completely overwhelmed. So the GPs have said to me, it's very clear, have an MP that stands up for the constituency. You can't fix the whole NHS, but in terms of proportional, fairer funding for our GPs, that is something you can fight for. And that is what I would do if you elect me as your MP. In terms of adult social care, what we will do is make sure that this is a valued profession. So in our manifesto, we will increase by £2 the minimum care for carers. And we will also increase the carers allowance for many who, like me, many of you are carers also for loved ones and elderly loved ones. So enabling you to juggle that with your everyday life. We would professionalise it with the Royal College of Carers, which is what everybody's been crying out for. And as for Brexit, the visa system at the moment means that it really is almost impossible to get the skilled and caring workers to come into this country. We would remove this terrible threshold which has been put on, not on age staff, but on care workers, that if you want to come here, they cannot bring their dependents. It's cruel, inhumane, and it makes no sense. And what it does is just add to the vacancies that we have. So we would professionalise so that people recruit and retain as many local people as want, but we would welcome the brilliant and caring people that come in and help look after our loved ones. Because as somebody said to me, the immigrant that you will meet in South Cambridgeshire is more likely to be the one treating you than being in front of you in the queue for the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Obviously, as I touched on in my opening remarks, the state of our NHS locally is particularly personally important to me and my family. And I've talked about my nephew, talking about the adult social care system here. Those of you who were there last night will have heard me talk about my mother's last months. She had early onset Alzheimer's. She passed away when she was just 59. And the local social care system was there for us when we needed it. And it would be my job as your Member of Parliament to ensure that it was there for as many of you. And we're doing that by putting that record funding in. But funding alone is not going to fix the problem. Each party is in an arms race to tell you they'll spend more money and more money and more money on the NHS. It has to go alongside reform. We have to look at how it's being spent and how it's being used at the point of use. That is extremely important. If you think back to when we came into office in 2010, what was the state of the NHS at that point? We had a 1-to-1 ratio between frontline staff and managers. It was completely wrong. It's taken years to address that problem and to focus on how we get the money we are spending best spent on the people who will deliver it. And part of that is on staff and retention. And that was the point I made at the beginning. It is unjust that people are being paid less money here in a higher cost of living area to deliver healthcare. So that is something that I would absolutely champion. Infrastructure is also very important. Many of you will know the government is supporting the cancer hospital. Construction has already commenced on Addenbrooke's. That will be a world-leading cancer site. And alongside it will be the Children's Hospital. And I know from many hours, as my sister does, that the current infrastructure there is not suited to caring for children with complex health conditions like my nephews. You need the new site where each child will have a place for them and their guardian. They'll have a better experience and better patient outcome. So it's investment, but it's also how we treat our NHS staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in 2010, in fact, Chris, I was one of those managers in the NHS who apparently was matched 1-for-1 by doctors and nurses. One of the reasons there were so many managers in the NHS is because of the way the funding is doled out to the NHS as it is to councils and highway authorities, because of the way money is given for projects and projects have to be managed, rather than simply funding the day-to-day business as usual properly, which is what is required. I'm also kind of finding myself in a bit of a deja vu that we're talking about health and social care. We need to fix the social care system, because what happened in 2010 was Andrew Lansley, who was MP here, as I'm sure many of you will know, became the Health Secretary and introduced the Health and Social Care Act. And that's what it was. It was revolutionary, Health and Social Care Act. It was supposed to fix the disconnect that I've been in the NHS since 2002. We'd sat in so many meetings, you know, talking and training and how do we solve the problem. The problem is social care, it's not integrated. The Health and Social Care Act, which became the Act in 2012, was supposed to fix that. Here we are 12 years later, same government's been in power and it hasn't been fixed. So perhaps Chris can explain how that didn't work out. But there are, in England and Wales, there are the same number of Green Party candidates as there are Labour candidates. 574 candidates out of the 575 seats in England and Wales. There are fewer, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but there are fewer Lib Dem and Conservative candidates. So in that utopia, in which instead of a huge Labour majority, all those Green candidates and enough Green candidates get voted in to have a Green majority, you will have a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of ongoing funding, not just investment, but ongoing resource funding for health and for social care, because the Green Party have a fully costed manifesto and we're not afraid to bring in taxes. We are asking those with the broadest shoulders. If anyone here has more than £10 million in assets, I'm sorry, you'll have to pay a bit more. But that's what we're going to do, changes to capital gains tax as well, because we realise that we simply need to redistribute the wealth. There is plenty of wealth in this country. It will be redistributed. And on the question of the staffing, yes, our approach to immigration will be very much kinder, very much more welcoming, because we do need those people to come and do jobs for our own birth rate is falling, actually. And the general policy on the EU is that the Green Party would welcome a return to the EU, and we want to work towards that.
Thank you.
I know, I'm actually, I'm going to thank Chris for bringing up slightly the record of the last Labour government. It's something that I like to talk about quite a bit, because actually under the last Labour government what we had was the lowest waiting times in NHS history. We had the highest patient satisfaction in the NHS, and we get a guaranteed NHS appointment within 48 hours at GP. So that was the last Labour government's real record, and this is why, in my opinion, we need to elect Labour government again. But how do we get there? And that's a genuine question. Obviously, the NHS always seems to need more money, and that is a very true fact. But we can't just give it a whole load of money and expect things to work. But we can make a start with it and giving it at least a bit of a cash injection. And one of the ways we can do that is by getting rid of completely the non-dom tax status. What that will allow is to give us an initial injection of money into the NHS that will allow us to free up 40,000 new appointments a week, which would hopefully get those waiting lists down. We're currently sat at a record 8 million strong waiting list in this country now. We need to get those waiting lists down. We spoke a little bit about, obviously, social care is extremely important as well. And one of the things about social care in this country especially is it is, as has been brought up at the moment, kind of disjointed. And one of Labour's goals eventually, as time goes on, is to create a national care service, which will basically run a very similar system to the National Health Service. It will be a universal system that has the same standards across the country, so we don't have this disconnect that we do right now. I also want to talk a little bit about Brexit, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. Because, see, we had Brexit happened, and one of the biggest things that came out of that is we got this quite horrible deal that the Conservatives created when, the oven-ready deal that was supposed to be fantastic and we're all going to be living all brilliant lives, and it turned out to be a load of hogwash. And we have an actual opportunity next year because the EU deal will actually be reopened for negotiation in 2025. So we actually have an opportunity then to have conversations with the EU to see if there's anything we can do to make that deal a lot stronger. I also finally want to talk about, if it's okay, NHS dentistry, because it's something that kind of gets a bit thrown to the side. Our NHS dentistry is abysmal at the moment. It is really like a desert to try to get an NHS dentist appointment. And we need to make sure that we are rebolstering that. We want to reform the contract so NHS dentists have a better chance of being able to enrol new NHS patients. And as part of that non-compact status that I described earlier, that will also allow us to have 700,000 new emergency appointments across the country. So there's a lot of things we want to do. It's going to take some time. We're going to need some reform as well, and also focus primarily on local healthcare. I'm hoping I can talk a little bit about that later.
Okay,
My
thank you.
time is now ended up. But yes, that's what we want to move forward with.
Okay. James?
Well, the question was, what do we do about the staff shortages? We live in a global market for intelligent, clever people who work in the health industry as a whole. It's very easy for doctors to shoot off to Australia. I can talk with at least 2 young men that I know who are heading off to Australia right now. So the short-term answer is you've got to throw a bit more money at it. The medium and long-term answer is that you've got to look at the NHS as a whole and ask yourself why, 76 years on, it hasn't been copied anywhere in the world, and whether there just might be people who organise themselves better in terms of how they fund healthcare. And I've spent some time in Japan, and in Japan they have more doctors per head of population than here. They have more nurses per head of population than here, and more beds per head of population. They also spend less than we do. Now that's for a number of reasons. They have a much healthier lifestyle. But I think the medium and long-term answer is to look at models elsewhere in the world and say, can we learn anything from other people? But the short-term answer is you've got to put it ahead.
Hello, hi. My name is Vicky and I live in Great Shelford. I lived in London for a few years, having lived in Cambridge and in Shelford and went to school here as well. So I lived in London for a few years. And I've just come back recently to live in Shelford, which I'm absolutely loving, by the way. I looked today, I double-checked, my council tax in London and then my council tax here in Shelford, and I've been slightly shocked and trying to get over the fact that I'm actually paying 4 times what I paid in London for council tax. And I'm still, whilst I'm absolutely happy to pay for the services that we need and require, I'm still struggling to come to terms with why I'm paying 4 times the amount that I paid in London, when I'm not really getting the services that I was getting in London. And then, on top of that, to discover that the council employees are working a 4-day week and being paid for 5 days. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, it's a massive problem. All over the country we're seeing council tax rises happening, and I'll give you one reason why that is because since 2010, we've had a situation where local funding that comes from the government has been slashed quite considerably to councils all around. I know a lot of councillors who are doing absolutely sterling work that aren't able to do the things they'd like to do because of having massive cuts from their funding. Now, obviously, one of the ways that councils are able to get additional funding, they have a few little levers that they're able to pull. One is council tax, and that is the reason why you see quite a few of these things go up, especially in an area that needs as much work at the moment as Cambridgeshire. Regarding the 4-day week, you know, I'm of the opinion that it's okay to trial things. And that's fine, and it's worth seeing how things can be run more efficiently. We talk about trying to reform things and making things run more efficiently. I'm all for that. On a personal note, I'm not entirely thrilled with the idea. I don't think it's the right sort of time to be implementing this on a full scale. But I have no problem with councils wanting to trial those things to see if they can find different efficiency savings here and there. So we'll see what the outcome of that trial is. As a parish councillor, this is something that actually does come up quite a lot in my parish council meetings, because we have our district councillors come and explain the situation, seeing where we are with things. I think one of the problems that did happen with the Lib Dem control council, though, is it took a very long time to get the figures out of how things are going from. I think we finally got them, but it did take a long time to get there. But the primary reason is just because we haven't had enough money coming into the local authority from national government, and we really need to have a look at how we can rejig that formula. Cambridge, as it was explained earlier, gets a very low amount of funding compared to a lot of areas in the country, and it's baffling because we have such ambition here and such potential to be really great, and we need to have an opportunity to get an MP who's going to fight for fair funding for this area, and I would be one that tries to get that. Thank you.
Hi, Nicky, thanks for the question. Well, I don't know where you lived in London, so I don't know how your residents there can pass. I'm quite shocked to hear that it was 4 times as much. Yeah, I mean, I've looked at my own bills.
Actually, 4.25.
4.5 times, gosh. Yeah. Yes, well, I've looked at our own bills for our household, and even with the energy prices having gone up so much as they have in the last couple of years, I realised that our very much increased, gas plus electricity plus water is matched like for like with council tax. We pay £300 a month for council tax and £300 a month for everything else. So it's a huge amount of the sort of monthly outgoings in a house here. I don't know if that's to do with density. There's obviously, yes, an element of government funding, and I think what a lot of people don't realise when they moan about we're not getting the services from the councils, is that all our councils have more or less, there's 2 pots of money. They get money from central government, whatever the technical term for it is, and money from council tax. And over the last probably a couple of decades, certainly since austerity, that government grant, I think it's called, has been reduced and reduced to local authorities, and they've had to rely more and more on the council tax. And that's certainly here, and maybe in London they don't have that problem. You mentioned the 4-day week. Now, it has actually been a long-term policy for the Green Party to move towards lower working hours, and there's reasons for that, because people who work shorter hours are actually happier people, they're healthier people. So there are benefits for the whole of society in terms of happier, healthier people, lower costs in terms of the NHS and so on. And actually, in terms of the climate, people who are happier and have more leisure time might sound paradoxical, but they consume less. If you think about it, when people are rushing around very long working hours, they're more likely to take, fast transport methods, they're more likely to eat fast food. So actually, we as the Green Party would want to move towards everyone having shorter working hours. So there's another thing along with immigration where we sit quite side by side with the Liberal Democrats on that. In terms of when we talk about a just transition to a lower carbon future, where we all do need to move towards a lower consumption future, and we say, what about all the people who, what about all the jobs for all those people who are employed making stuff to sell that we don't need? Well, one way of making that a just transition is to spread that work out. We want everyone to have good, worthwhile work. And if there's less good, worthwhile work to go around, then everyone doing it for fewer days a week is one way to solve that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. The answer is no, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's frankly a disgrace. And if you look at the rise in council tax that we have seen this year, the record amount is what the Liberal Democrats have put your council tax up by here. In neighbouring East Cambs, which is Conservative run, they made a statement that to help with the cost of living, they would freeze council tax and they would find a way of delivering those services within the parameters that they have got. Now the fact here, they've had the temerity to put it up and then to say to people, you only need to work 4 days a week and we'll pay you for 5. I mean, it beggars belief. The government have instructed the council twice to stop doing this and issued a best value notice. The Taxpayers Alliance is running a campaign to say that this is a very, very poor use of public money. Government has no money of its own. There is only taxpayers' money. It's your money that is being used to do this. And when you go to Camborne, if any of you have, for access to services or for meetings, as I have done, there is barely anyone in that building. There is just floor after floor of empty space in a building that the Liberal Democrats spent £2 million refurbishing and then a further £250,000 for nobody to sit in it. If you feel that you're getting the level of service here on the ground that warrants people having a day off, that warrants all of the disruption, the bin crews all being moved around, and we've spoken to them as well, and also people filling in questionnaires of work now and saying, I no longer have to deliver perfect work, I can now just do average work because I'm working 4 days a week. I think it's wrong, and as your MP, I fight to stop it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where is your flat house in London? Which constituency?
I don't know more.
But where was it? Which?
Wandsworth.
Wandsworth, all right. Yeah, I was lucky enough to live in Westminster a number of years ago, and at one stage, flat D council tax was 0. But it's all to do with the support that you get from central government, so it's a little bit unfair. But a more general thing is the property taxes are not very fairly levied at all, generally. I'm not sure that I think that we get very good value from the South District Council. In terms of reduced numbers of days, in my own businesses, we looked at doing that because a number of private sector people have done that. What they tend to do, Atom Bank is the most pertinent example, is they ask people to work 4 longer days instead of 5 shorter days. So Atom Bank, for example, cut their staff hours from 37.5 hours per week, spread over 5 days, to 34, I think it was, spread over 4. But now I think what the South Cambridgeshire Council has done is not very sensible.
I think Chris is right, it's absolutely disgraceful. You know, what people expect in their local communities is for them to flourish and be served well with the public services. But the Conservative government has absolutely slashed all central government to local government. And that has meant the only tool that they have then is to raise the council tax. But when I'm going around the communities and talking to people on the doors, what everybody feels now in the state under this Conservative government is that just everything's broken. Nothing works anymore, paying more for less. And what the Liberal Democrats will do, because we believe in local, we believe in devolving power and resources to our local communities, to our local government, really where people know what's needed most. And we would restore the funding to local government to make sure that those vital basic services would be provided. And also, because local government is on the front line in terms of climate change, so we'd also give them local powers to deal with climate change. If I look at to the 5-day working week, it's a trial by a council to deal with a human resources issue. So what we have in South Cambridgeshire District Council are hard to fill positions because of the cost of living and the problems with transport. So we have had in key positions like planning, which is so important in South Cambridgeshire, as we know, that we couldn't fill. At one point, you know, there were more than 40% of those positions that couldn't be filled. What is wrong is to use taxpayer money to pay agency staff to fill those roles. So this is about, in local government, there's a few things. So one, you can't offer more money because there's a cap on the amount you can pay salaries within local government. 2, can you offer people professional development and progression? Not really. And we want people to stay and know people, know their local community, because that's how you give good public services. 3, what can you do to offer the staff who are being snapped up, planners are snapped up by the private sector, offer double the pay? So what can you offer as local government work-life balance. And that's what's being trialled at the moment. So that additional day, it's about looking after perhaps the caring opportunity, the caring needs that you have, other duties that you have. But the one criteria that we've had in that trial is to make sure that there isn't a lowering of the quality of service that anybody has. And that will maintain as the criteria. But as I said, it's a trial, it's a human resources trial. And to get the taxpayers' allowance, and to get central government coming in on a tiny district council, telling it what it should and shouldn't do with a human resources issue, that is a waste of money in my view. Thank you.
Which candidate is going to protect our local countryside the best? Which candidate is going to protect our beautiful village here in Great Shelford?
Well, Howard, thank you so much for your question, and I think that you're completely right, this comes down to trust. Now, each of the candidates, I think, here have been asked on multiple occasions for their positions on these issues, and I understand from talking to thousands of people on the doorstep that some of the candidates are reluctant to share their view and are, quote, remaining on the fence until after the election. Well, I am not. I unequivocally oppose the destruction that would be caused by CSET and C2C. I have campaigned on both of them. I've visited the sites that would be affected by them. We're talking about ecosystem smash, we're talking about huge pollution to our environment, division between our communities, physical division within our communities, and in the case of both C2C and CSET, that have terrible cost-benefit ratios, well below what should be allowed for them to move forward. There are cheaper alternatives. That's what's so staggering about the situation. Is not only would we save considerable sums of taxpayers' money, £100 million in the case of CSET, we would also save the environment at the same time and the damage from our communities. So each candidate should give you their position. I oppose C2C and CSET, both have better alternatives. East-West Rail coming through this constituency is completely wrong. Of the 6 potential route options, it is by far the worst and would decimate 13 villages. It would run diesel trains down it, and it has a terrible freight capacity and economic record. So it must be stopped. On each of these issues, you brought up the GCP. The GCP's involvement here is totally woeful. They said at a meeting I attended once, we don't really do rail, we understand, you want some rail there, Chris doesn't like rail, and that might be a solution, but we just do busways. Well, you don't. You're terrible at it. The GCP should be abolished, and that money spent on a light rail trial for this constituency. Let's actually put the environment first with action and enough of the rhetoric.
Thank you very much. Well, before tonight, nobody's asked me my view on CSET, I'm against it. Nobody asked me my view on C2C, I'm against it. I spoke yesterday to a very nice BBC journalist about the East-West Railway, which I'm against the entire thing, not just the line, but the whole thing.
So thank you. You asked about environmental credentials, and so I think of all of us that are here, I've worked for over 20 years on climate and environment. I've worked for the UN in multiple countries. I have been at every single climate summit helping governments with their negotiations, and in COP26 I was chosen on a cross-party basis, all parties, to represent not only local government here in the UK but globally, to make sure that local climate action was in the Glasgow Agreement. So in terms of that, my skills that I'm bringing to South Cambridgeshire, which I brought as being elected as a councillor, and I would bring as an MP, is I'm trained as a conflict negotiator. And that's about conflict between environment and development. And here in South Cambridgeshire is what we need. We have constituents who absolutely, desperately need better public transport. And we need to provide urgently that public transport for young families and key workers. At the same time, we have to protect our villages.
Okay, can we have some respect, please, while somebody is speaking? We do not heckle from the audience. Thank you very much.
I've got 3 elements to it. 1, your environmental credentials. 2, your honesty, integrity and skills that you would bring to this. And 3, do you support or oppose? I'm on the second one, which is about the skills to make sure that here, whether it's light rail, busways, east-west rail or improved buses, what isn't happening is that the MP is bringing people around the table and bashing their heads together to make sure we've got a joined-up approach. That isn't what's happening, and that is what I would do. In terms of C2C, I will be honest, it's a very advanced stage. So what I've called for is for a full public inquiry. There's a public inquiry for the compulsory purchase of property. I've called for a public inquiry to expand the scope of that, to look at the on-road and off-road options, particularly around Madingley and where it's cutting across Coton. Because I've heard both sides. I've heard the sides that say it's possible on-road and those that say it's not possible on-road, we have to go off-road. That has to be transparent. In public domain, not GCP marking its homework behind closed doors. In the public, transparently finding out if the on-road or the off-road options, which one is right. That is what I would do for you, is to make sure your voice is heard and we influence the decision making. Thank you.
What was that? Different question.
Okay. Can we?
Did you answer the question?
Okay. Can we please stop? I will allow another question on this topic after all candidates have responded.
Like you said, your question is split into a few different parts. I would also like to start with the matter of trust, because it is extremely important. We do see a lot of people in times past promise things and then get into government and do something completely different, and it is something that we see all too often. It's why the Labour Party in this election, when we put forward our manifesto, put forward a very dedicated plan to make sure that we could tell you exactly what we're going to do and what we want to deliver if we were to be elected into government. On these individual different proposals, I actually had Hustings very recently in Coton because we had a nice whole big Hustings on the Coton busway, and I went and visited the orchard myself as well and saw the effects that it may have. Now, I'm, like Chris, a big believer in light rail. I think it is a very good solution to move forward with that. The problem is it costs a lot of money, and to get that money to come in straight away is going to be a big problem. The way I see it, with, at least on the C2C front, is if you need to have light rail, you've got to have dedicated tracks to put that light rail on. It can't just go on the road, it has to go on dedicated tracks. And I've been repeatedly assured that on the case of the Coton busway, we have an opportunity in the future to put that and convert it into a light rail line. And for me, having that track there will give us potential to kickstart that. If we want light rail, we have to start somewhere. And that's where I see it. I know that Pippa mentioned this whole public inquiry thing. There will be a public inquiry. It's part of the legislation going forward that there will be a, but she can call for it if she wants. There will be a public inquiry. So that's right that that's going to happen. I'm glad it's going to happen because it's worth having the residents and people, you know, involved when those decisions are made. But that will happen. But I have to say, because I want light rail to happen, I see it's a piece of the puzzle to moving forward with that. In the case of CSET, I will admit I am slightly less convinced by the route. I think having the park and rental park and having the access to that is brilliant. But if we're going to talk about mass transport, I think having something that goes all the way down to Haverhill will be a lot more beneficial because there are a lot of workers in Haverhill that need to come up to work in Cambridge South in that area as well. So I think that's something that is definitely worth looking at again. I'm going to make sure I've covered absolutely everything here. I think I have. But yeah, that's what I would definitely advocate if I was to be elected as your MP. Like I said, I'm broadly for the Copen busway. If we can move it towards light rail, I think we can improve CSET slightly, and it would be good. I have a meeting actually next week with some members of the County Council and also the GCP to express my concerns on that particular route and how we're going to go forward with it. But those are my two positions, and I hope I've been able to answer your question before. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Howard, for the question. Golly. To answer your question unequivocally, no, I do not support these routes. So yes, I will defend our constituency against C2C, against CSET, and against East-West Rail. And that's in print, because I see Barbara's got a copy of this week's Cambridge Independent. We were all candidates. I don't think James got the message, but the other four of us were all asked certain questions by the Cambridge Independent, one of which was, do you approve? And the first of my 100-word answer was, no. You can read the rest in the paper. Pippa talked about the urgent need for better public transport, and she's right, yes. So the city deal, as it was originally, was first granted in 2014, I think. And I think it was 2016 when the first concepts were published, goodness knows how much the City Deal, as it was then, spent on some, probably London consultants to draw a line on a map and say, look, you could have a busway. That was 2016. Let's go backwards and forwards. Oh no, don't worry, we'll save the Magog Hills. Oh, perhaps no, we won't. 2018, as we pointed out, we voted in the Liberal Democrats. Some of us locally were personally assured by the people we voted for as our Liberal Democrat district councillors that they would stop the busway. And now here we are. Somebody's talking about the balance between the environment and, what was it, the other thing? There is no, that's right, the balance between environment and development. Well, I'm sorry, but actually you can have development and growth, or you can have the environment. You cannot have both. And that's why I've joined the Green Party, because we are the only party that realises this. We are the only party that realises we need to slow down those parts of our current economy, which are damaging our world. We need to grow the things that are good for us. Yes, grow the things that, grow nature, grow choirs, grow, social events, grow. We need to grow food. But I just want to suggest that you compare the answers Chris Chapman is giving on East West Rail to the answers that Antony Brown is giving in Hustings and St Neots and the Cambridgeshire on East West Rail, because Antony Brown is quite a cheerleader for East West Rail. I was in St Neots last week and he was telling them how marvellous it would be that they'll be able to get a train from somewhere near St Neots, because it's actually about a mile away from St Neots, to Cambridge South in 30 minutes. Well, I then left that Hustings on the bus, and I got the bus from St Neots, and I was in Cambridge in 30 minutes on the bus. So I said in 2016, long before I joined the Green Party, I said, we've got roads, we just need more buses on the roads. Every bus can take, up to 75 people, that's up to 75 cars off the road. People in the GCP, I sat through so many meetings when it was Conservative Roger Hickford, our previous county councillor, chairing it. He said, oh, but you can't possibly run buses on roads because they'll get stuck in congestion. They just don't understand that if you've got enough buses, which people use because they're frequent enough and they're cheap enough and people know where they go from and know where they stop and know when they come, then you take those cars off the road and buses will run smoothly on the roads. Actually, Jim Chisholm, I don't think I see him here, but he will explain that it's a surprisingly small fractional reduction in traffic that you need to actually have the flow. You only really need 10% reduction, the kind of reduction you get in traffic at half term. You don't actually need to halve the amount of traffic to stop congestion. So, yeah, sorry, Barbara. I could talk all night about buses.
Thank you very much. I feel that question has been answered. Is there an extension question on that topic, as it is a very popular topic? There's a lady in front. Right, can I get her? Who's the most appropriate?
Thank you. My name is Laura Moss and I live in Great Shelford. I'd like to ask Chris to respond to Miranda's point, I think. So the Conservative government and the Department of Transport have been very, very supportive of East West Rail, and they, on multiple occasions have said we will invest in East West Rail. I don't think Antony Brown, as our MP, has been able to make any inroads against central government. So what makes you think, as our candidate, you can oppose East West Rail when it's your Conservative government that is 100% committed to East West?
Thank you very much for the question, and it is a very important one, and it comes down to this issue of trust. So I have unequivocally opposed the East West Rail Southern approach for the past 2 years, and I have met with each of the villages that are on its line. I've met with Cambridge Approaches and all the groups that are seeking to change that route north, because on all of the metrics that we've discussed tonight, whether it be freight, whether it be the cost, whether it be the environmental damage, it is in the wrong location. When the Prime Minister came to the constituency on Monday, I had a meeting with him, and I used my meeting with him to talk about East West Rail and to put to him the case that actually the northern approach, which has a higher freight capacity, costs less money, does less environmental damage, and would give vital connectivity to Northstowe, is the way to go. We are about to go into a two-stage public consultation. I don't think that some of the people on this panel are going to fight for the 13 villages that are going to be affected. I think they're going to do what Ed Davey did when he got off his banana bus, yellow bus, whatever it was, when he got off the other day, and said, we support East West Rail. They were his words when the BBC asked him that question. So do you want an advocate who's going to fight tooth and nail and will not give up until we ensure that East West Rail does not go down that route and goes along the northern approach, or a better one, there were 6 alignments that we're looking at, or do you want someone in the public consultation in the months to come who will say, well, we'll tinker around the edges, but build it? That's your choice on July the 4th.
Maybe to ensure that we can get
I will. I'll make it quick. Yeah. So on the case of East West Rail, obviously we just spoke about Antony Brown and these decisions that have been made. It's actually kind of funny because when Antony Brown was obviously the constituent MP for here, he was actually quite opposed to the southern route of East West Rail. He moved up north to St Neots and Buchanan's, and now suddenly is thinking that the southern route is the best idea since sliced bread. And this is the kind of thing that just about trust. This is what's important about it. People changing their minds depending on where they are. I'll be completely honest, I'm a big believer in rail. I do think we need to increase the rail capacity we have in this country. I find it quite insane, to be honest, that we have to, if you want to go anywhere west in this country, you have to go through London and use the tube network. Our European allies seem to be able to do it quite well. It's kind of baffling that we can. But I am also a big believer that any kind of rail system really should, especially if it's going to be a big infrastructure project, it should benefit the local communities. And we were supposed to have a consultation, I think, in Haslingfield, somewhere around that sort of area, this month about this, but unfortunately the election got that delayed. But if I was your MP, the things that I would definitely be advocating for more than anything is if this is going to go ahead in the southern area, that we are able to have a stop in between Camborne and Cambridge South, because it has to benefit residents. Residents have to be able to use the service, and also the fact that it's going to be a diesel line as well is absolutely unacceptable. It has to be electrified, it definitely has to be. I just wanted to put that out there because I didn't get a chance to actually answer it in the previous question, because that's what my position should be on the problem. Thank you.
Chris, I just want to come back to this point that you have essentially, you say you have 2 choices. I'll remind you you've got 6 choices. And Luke, after our first Hustings, I went home on the back of the envelope. I worked out how you could get from Cambridge to Bristol, because I know you want to go home to Bristol on the train. So if you go via King's Cross Paddington, or Farringdon and Paddington, and now we've got the Elizabeth line, of course, it'll take you between 3 hours and 9 minutes and 3 hours and 26 minutes, depending on the connections.
I remember the journey well.
Yeah, so if you get yourself from Oxford to Bristol, it's about 1.5 hours, give or take, right? And East West Rail is predicting 89 minutes, so that's another hour and a half from Cambridge all the way to Oxford. So that still adds up to 3 hours, plus however long you spend changing in Oxford and waiting for the connections, because they won't, we know what connections are like. So it's not going to speed up your journey. It's a choice of changing at Oxford or changing through London. I don't think that's worth £8 billion, I'm sorry.
Okay, good night. We have one more question.
We have a question that was submitted earlier. Will the candidates support the UK's continued membership of the European Court of Human Rights and the associated convention? If not, which rights do they feel we can do without?
Thank you, Barbara. Well, yeah, I confess, I haven't checked in the Green Party manifesto, but sue me if it doesn't say yes, we do can support continued membership, because I'm pretty damn sure that we do. So there are no rights we need to remove.
Okay, right. Okay, Pippa.
Thank you very much. Well, as Liberal Democrats, in our manifesto, what is front and centre is to fight against the rise of authoritarianism across the world. It's a very dangerous world, and what we need is really good, strong relationships, one with our closest trading partners, but also across the world. And so we would make sure that we are part of multilateral organisations like the UN, like NATO, and we would make sure we remain within the European Court of Human Rights. And what would we do is make sure that we really do get rid of this conservative, hostile environment. We would scrap the Rwanda plan, which is the only reason they're talking about coming out of the European Court of Human Rights and the Convention on Human Rights, and we would safe and legal routes for asylum, because that is the way that we absolutely stop these treacherous channel crossings, and the money that is being spent on this immoral and unworkable Rwanda plan, we would plough into dealing with the backlog of those who are seeking asylum, which is over 100,000 people who are already more than 1 year in temporary accommodation, which is being funded by the taxpayer, unable to contribute to our communities.
No, we should have got out of the European village. Absolutely not.
I think you're going to have a uniformity here in this answer, in that no, I don't believe that we should opt out of it. I do believe that we can deliver the priorities around stopping the heartbreaking crossings that we're seeing across the channel, people putting children, women in horrible peril to make those crossings, by looking at the root causes, how we on the ground in the country that these people are originating from are able to provide safer alternative options into this country. The schemes that we've got active at the moment, whether it be for people from Afghanistan, whether it be people from Hong Kong, how we operate those schemes in a compassionate and fair way so that nobody feels that they have to make that crossing. At the same time, it is very important that supranational organisations are not turning to Great Britain and saying, your sovereignty does not come first on this issue, and we will curtail, force or alter democratic legislation that has gone through our Houses of Parliament. So a balance has got to be struck. Do I personally think that we should leave? No, I do not.
Brilliant. Sometimes I wonder if Chris knows his own party's policy, but there we go. The answer is yes, we should stay in it, of course. The Rwanda scheme is an absolute gimmick. We've spent hundreds of millions of pounds on something that has literally taken one migrant to Rwanda, and he went voluntarily. So it is an absolute shambles. What we would do is we would scrap the Rwanda scheme, invest the money in a new border security command, designate those gangs as terrorist organisations, and smash them. That is a Labour policy, that's what we'll do.
Okay, you've gone through that very quickly. Well done. Okay, we said we'd finish at 9 o'clock, so to allow for everybody to have a round-up answer now, we will not take any more questions. So,
we'll be in the pub afterwards.
I mean, there are lots of questions that could have been asked. There are questions about, for instance, Cambridge City Food Bank, who is at the moment in dire need. They cannot afford to keep running the food bank because they're buying more food than they're actually getting donated. Cambridge is deemed to be a very rich place. It's not. It's a very poor place. We haven't touched on the poverty side of what's going on in Cambridge, but I am sure that within the realms of the future, you will be able to address that in other hustings. Okay, so we now need to go to reverse order. So that will be starting with Chris. You have 2 minutes to round up what you have been saying. And we'll have to set my alarm. Sorry. Dear. Alarms, edit. Set up. No alarm.
So we just turn it to 6 minutes, that's
Come on. Come on, folks. Sorry about this. I'm really not very good. Set up. Go on.
Do you want me to start?
Start yours and I'll get
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming tonight and taking part in what is such an important part of the democratic process ahead of the general election. We've all talked about why we're in politics and why we're doing it, and there was a slogan when I was a boy, a Conservative Party slogan, and it said, what can the Conservative Party offer a working class boy from Brixton? And the answer was, we made him Prime Minister. I'm in politics because it's aspiration. It's enabling people to make the best for their lives and their families' lives and the communities that we are seeking to represent as your next Member of Parliament. We've talked about trust this evening, but I wonder when you leave here this evening, do you actually know where each candidate is on the most important environmental issues that are facing this constituency? Do you think that some of the other Members of Parliament that want to become Members of Parliament sat here are going to fight for you tooth and nail to stop East West Rail cutting through our communities? Do you think that they are going to represent you on CSET and go for the less environmentally damaging, cheaper option that the people want when they were consulted, 2/3 of them? Do you think they're going to save the ancient orchard that is Cloughton, and again, save £90 million? Do you think they're going to hold your council to account that is wasting huge amounts of taxpayers' money? I think on this point of the environment, and it has been a major part of our discussion here this evening, in Pippa's answer earlier, she turned to all of us and said, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, so, I know more than you. Well, I was farming in this constituency before you ever visited it. I think I know rather more about our environment and protecting it, and I'm willing to take a stand on each of these issues so that you will have an advocate in the room who will not rest until we get the best result. I think Luke had a little quip there at the end, so I'll have to say that in most of our hustings so far, Luke has said, I'm really worried about class sizes. Well, if the spiteful, malicious policy of putting 20% on independent school fees is brought through, he will drive class sizes through the roof. I'll stand up for you. Please do support me on July 4th.
So, thank you for coming here this evening and for sharing what are your priorities and taking part in this vital democratic process. And I think what we've heard is that the issues that do count are local ones, and whether that is about protecting our precious local environment, our chalk streams, our orchards, our bluebell woods, and also balancing that with the needs of other constituents, which is about young people having the public transport that they need to access their colleges, apprenticeships, amenities, opportunities, and also making sure that elderly people aren't stuck and isolated at home, not even able to go out and see their GPs and get to the hospital. We've also heard that it's about the national issues that matter, and that's health and social care, education, immigration, our standing in the world. I'm going to say 3 things that we get if you vote for me as the Liberal Democrat, as your MP. Firstly, what I was trying to say is what I've got experience at is being able to bring all voices around the table and find a solution. This is what I've spent my life doing so that we can make sure that climate and environment are part of decision making and that local people have a voice. Secondly, when you vote for Liberal Democrats, you get a local champion, and we'll fight for the NHS, we'll really help those struggling with the cost of living, and stop sewage dumping in our chalk streams. And thirdly, it's because we're crying out for change here in the country. And here in South Cambridgeshire, we're also crying out for change. And the Liberal Democrats are the party that can unseat the Conservatives here in South Cambridgeshire and get that once-in-a-generation opportunity for change. So if you elect me as your MP, I would just be so hugely proud and would work incredibly hard to make sure that your voices are heard and we shape our future together.
I've spoken at length elsewhere about my views on the irrelevance of those 2019 results as featured on many bar charts leaflets you can send. This is 2024. So much has changed politically since 2019. Most importantly, the world has changed. Climate breakdown is no longer a far-off concern we think might affect our grandchildren. We can see that it's happening now, with dangerous severe weather events around the world and here at home. The good news from the Green Party is that the solutions to the climate crisis are the same as those needed to end the cost of living and inequality crises. And, contrary to what these primary coloured parties would like you to think, every vote quite literally counts, thanks to what's called the short money formula, which gives public money to fund opposition parties in proportion to how many votes they get, whether or not they get MPs. It's about £1 for each of your votes across the whole Parliament. I'll end by reminding you that the battle for control of number 10 Downing Street will not be won or lost in South Cambridgeshire. We are just one of 650 constituencies voting on the 4th of July. I also might mention that there are 5 people here. 4 of us can vote for ourselves, 1 of us can't vote for ourselves. What is definitely at stake here is what you'll be voting for, is the future of this South Cambridgeshire constituency. Do you want to be part of a supersized city, with our precious countryside carved up, wildlife chased away in that obsessive quest for growth? Do you think that this growth will make you happier or healthier, or make it any easier for the next generation to afford to live here? Or would you rather vote for an MP and a party who have a fairer, greener vision?
Thank you.
Well, I echo the expression of thanks that the three previous speakers have made to you. Thank you very much for coming. It's very important that you participate. I may be wrong, Alf and Anne, but I get the sense that some of you have expressed the view that government isn't listening to us, and that's government at every level. There's been criticism of central government, there's been criticism of the district council, and there's been criticism of the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership. I think it's a very difficult position. I think that probably the sentiment that government isn't listening to me is something that's shared by a lot of people. Luckily, the four outsiders in this six-horse race aren't compromised on things like East-West Rail, are we, where our own personal views are at odds with our parties. That's, I think, one of the reasons why it's still worth considering voting independent, because if you elect me, and I think the odds are quite unlikely, but if you elect me, I would have only you to be responsible for. I wouldn't have to say, well, I have to check what my party leaders say. I actually have to say, well, what do my constituents say? One of the things that the independent platform would be prepared to do is to have weekly Zoom meetings to which all constituents would be invited, so that we can listen to what you say rather than tell you what politicians think. What am I thinking about?
I just want to start by saying me and Chris actually do get on very well. I promise. We do. But if we're going to do a bit of tit for tat, at least I'm proud to stand on my party's platform instead of otherwise. Thank you very much for everyone for coming tonight. You know, this is our fourth Hustings, I think we've done now. We've got a couple more next week to do as well. We're very privileged in South Cambridgeshire to have such active parish councils who want to set up so many Hustings. I know quite a few of the other constituencies in the area have only had one. Some have had none at all. So it's good that we're having so many, because it's a good opportunity for us to get out there, actually talk to you about what we want to do, and also you get to see us, which I think is extremely important as well. Pippa explained it, but it's true. You know, this is a change election. We have had 14 years, in my opinion, that have been wasted, 14 wasted years. And I think we need to have, in my opinion, a Labour government, a change of government, a Labour government that's mission-driven, that will not, let's be honest, it's going to fix everything overnight. It's going to, my party leader talks a lot about a decade of national renewal, and that's really what it's going to be. But we can at least start planting the seeds and seeing the shoots grow of a few of the things that I've explained tonight. Obviously, there's a few we haven't. Crime and poverty, housing is another big thing. Lots of issues to discuss further on, but hopefully start to bring up the shoots to show you that things can be different in this country, considerably different. We did it before when we got in 1997, and we fixed this country. We can do it again. And what do you have the opportunity to do? I'll tell you what you have the opportunity to do is, you can elect a Labour MP that hopefully, fingers crossed, will be able to work directly with a Labour government to put real investment and real change into this constituency and really gather the things we need to make this area thrive. If there's any questions that you have after this Hustings, please do approach me. I'm more than happy to discuss anything else. My website also has a few links where you can go and check my email and send me some emails and things like that. But thank you very, very much for coming. And I will just end on this quote, and I have done on the previous Hustings as well, because it's extremely important to me. If you leave your country in a worse state than you found it, it's absolutely unforgivable. And that's what we've seen for the past 14 years. We need change, and we need it drastically. Thank you very much.
For turning up tonight. We did have the Reform candidate invited, but he is unable to come tonight due to work commitments, I believe. Okay, so you've heard what the candidates have said. You may not feel you've had the answers that you wanted. They are available. They will, we hope, listen. But please do vote. That is the most important thing, whatever you do, and wasting your vote will not change anything. So thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to the results of the election.